Welcome to Saturdays at 7, Christian Scholars Review's conversation series with thought leaders about the academic vocation and the relationship that vocation shares with the church. My name is Todd Ream. I have the privilege of serving as the publisher for Christian Scholars Review and as the host for Saturdays at 7. I also have the privilege of serving on the faculty and the administration at Indiana Wesleyan University. Our guest is Dr. John T. McGreevy, the Charles and Jill Fischer Provost, and the Francis A. McAnaney Professor of History at the University of Notre Dame. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you, Todd.
As Notre Dame's Provost, in what ways, if any, are 2 days the same?
It is, so I'm speaking from the experience of a whole 15 months. So take what I say with a little bit of a grain of salt, but that is one of the enjoyable parts of the job. If I think about today, I'm going to meet with a group of faculty to talk about leadership changes. I'm, meeting with a couple of the deans in our regular one-on-one monthly meetings. There's a development event and dinner tonight, meeting to talk about our strategic framework a little bit later in the day. So, and I'm talking to you. And so it is true that there's a little bit of a rhythm to the academic calendar, as all of you know, but an appealing part of the job, one reason I was happy to accept it when I was offered is the multitude of things you get to do and see. Mm-hmm. So that is attraction. No 2 days are exactly the same.
You come with a considerable amount of administrative experience before this, but until one serves as the chief academic officer, there's no way to sort of fully lean into what that may ask. But what components of your previous professional formation are you now finding most beneficial with your current role?
I would say, and again, I don't want to exaggerate, 15 months, ask me again 15 months later, but I would say it's nice to have some curiosity about other intellectual areas of the university. Obviously, I'm a historian, and so know a little bit about the Department of History and historical scholarship. But one thing I liked about being dean, I was dean for 10 years, was seeing how other fields worked and what were the big issues that faculty were grappling with in other fields. And now I have an even wider panorama there, on issues in neuroscience or in chemical engineering or in finance that I wasn't paying attention to before. Now I get to see a little bit of that. Who are the faculty that we're recruiting? What kind of curriculum makes sense for our undergraduates? How do we think about graduate professional training? All of that is good training from the vantage point. I mean, I often think historians are pretty curious and like to learn about a lot of different things. And so I feel like my training as a historian serves me well there. I guess that'd be the main answer. I mean, I was used to being an administrator from being dean. In that sense, similar to being provost, except I will say the pace of the provost office is even faster. There's more going on.
Notre Dame is one of the newest members of the Association of American Universities. In what way is Notre Dame comparable to the other roughly 70 schools that comprise that group?
My little joke is that before we were admitted into AAU, which for us was a pretty big deal, we thought the membership procedures were deeply unjust and maybe even prejudicial. Now that we've been admitted, we don't want anyone else ever to be admitted. That is, but it was a nice honor. We've talked about being in the AAU for 20 years and, done a lot of things that we thought would position ourselves for it. But honestly, it was a surprise. It's a very secretive process. It's not, and there are some metrics that are publicly available, but a lot aren't. We were really excited the day we got the call from the AAU, the president call. I would say there'll be a couple benefits to us from membership of the AAU. They have regular meetings. So I was just at the provost meeting in Washington, D.C. You have to imagine 50-some provosts in a room for 3 days and talking about issues in higher education. There's a president's meeting, a meeting for the graduate education deans and the vice presidents of research. So that's a good thing. And we'll have access to some data. It's also true, though, that we are the only religiously affiliated university at AAU. And Brandeis is kind of a liminal case. Brandeis was founded by the American Jewish community after World War II, but it's not formally affiliated with any religious tradition. And Notre Dame is. And I think that's good for the AU and good for us. For us to be in that company, these are certainly, if you look at the private research universities that we often compare ourselves to, these are the ones we want to compare ourselves to, the best in the world. At the same time, as a religiously affiliated university, we might offer a somewhat different model of academic excellence, and that's good for the AU and good for higher education.
Yeah.
So I like to think it's going to be great for everyone, our being in the AU. Probably most beneficial to us, but maybe even a little bit beneficial to the AU.
Yeah. Having just come from that meeting then, if I may ask, in what ways do you estimate your role is comparable to other provosts, and in what ways, as that, sole religiously affiliated university, is it different?
Mostly comparable. And listen, I was quiet, almost quiet as a mouse at the meeting because I wanted to just pay attention and learn in my first meeting, and I'll have other chances to talk. And so most of the issues were not issues that were in any way particularly religious. They ranged from graduate student unionization to the influence of China on American universities and actually potential for Chinese espionage, to how does the general public perceive American universities, which is generally not that great, and those sorts of topics. So mostly topics that would be interest to any university. There may become a time when some of the topics, veer, especially around free speech, veer into religious issues, and maybe we'll have a special contribution to make there. But right now, just trying to learn as much as I can.
Yeah. One of the strengths of research universities is their ability to marshal resources that are needed to follow wherever truth may lead. And while often advantageous, those pursuits are often reductionistic in nature, perpetuating what Clark Kerr, a former president of the University of California, called multiversities. Notre Dame is often referred to as a great experiment when it comes to its place as a research university. And as a Catholic research university, in what ways is Notre Dame oriented to pursue truth when needed in reductionistic ways, but yet also oriented to pursue truth in interconnective ways, reflective of God's created order as a whole?
Yeah, I mean that is something, maybe using different vocabulary, that we think about quite a lot. At the pragmatic level, I think universities are pretty good, and Notre Dame's not an exception to this, at building boundaries between departments and centers and division in colleges and schools. And it probably is true that we have to be a little bit more willing to cross some of those boundaries to make a bigger impact with our scholarship and the ways in which we train students. We're thinking about that pretty hard here. We have some multidisciplinary initiatives we've launched, one in poverty, one on democracy, one on ethics, that we really try and marshal the resources of the whole university around some of those initiatives. There'll be more as well. So at a very pragmatic level, I think universities need to get better at doing that. I'm not new in saying this, has been said for a long time, but it seems more pressing given the problems that the world faces.
Yeah.
At a more philosophical or even theological level, that does coincide with a very Catholic vision that truth is non-contradictory, and that we can find truth in many domains, and that the great scientists often have philosophical questions that they need to think about, and vice versa. That's one reason we have a requirement at Notre Dame for undergraduates in philosophy and theology, a sense that those questions should be part of any undergraduate. And again, we're not unique there, but I do think at a moment when universities are called on to do more, and there's a lot of public scrutiny of universities, the idea that we can marshal the resources of the university across department divisional lines is appealing.
Mhm.
I say that recognizing that expertise is real, right? Disciplinary expertise is real. And the disciplinary expertise of a great molecular chemist, right, is profound. And we can't just substitute that for something else. But how do we get that person, get her to look up and say, okay, and here are the big picture questions that my research raises? That's the alluring part.
Yeah. You were an undergraduate at Notre Dame and then did graduate work at Stanford. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but your first appointment was at Harvard, and
Right.
then you returned to Notre Dame. As a historian, how would you describe the emergence of your vocation over time?
Gosh, that's a big question. As a historian or as a human being, and I should add, I did a postdoctoral fellowship for a year at Valparaiso
Okay.
University.
It's part of
Just
the Lilly Fellows program.
the Lilly Fellows program, just after getting my PhD. Without getting too, highfalutin about it, when I was in undergraduate college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my peers were great, and they said, study what you love, which is advice I always give students too. Study what you're most interested in,
Yeah.
and we'll figure out the future. And I would love my history classes. And I actually thought about both teaching in high school and in college, and I thought about law school too, more out of like, I don't know what to do. Maybe I like school, and ended up teaching in high school a little while in Chicago and enjoyed that, but thought maybe the intellectual dimensions of graduate school maybe better suited me. But I had no intellectual agenda when I went to graduate school. I thought I'd like to be a college teacher. That was it. I didn't have a topic I wanted to pursue. It took me a little while to figure that out. But I did fall in love with the work. I happened to go to a great program at Stanford. I always tell graduate students, I applied to like 12 graduate schools and I got admitted at one, and it was at Stanford, and I went, and it turned out to be a great fit. And there were great faculty and other, in a graduate program, you learn as much from your fellow students as from anybody else, and other students that were great. So all of that helped shape vocation where, okay, I could really see myself as a college teacher. I found I enjoyed the writing. I liked talking about books, and I always knew I'd like to be a teacher, that vocation. And I fell into the research and gradually came to love it.
Yeah.
So I feel unbelievably fortunate to have had the opportunities I've had in the career I've had. And it was, a lot of it was happenstance or providence.
When you were dean, you did a fair amount of writing for larger public audiences on graduate education. Regardless of the academic area, what advice would you offer to young people today who are considering the academic vocation?
It does depend a little bit on area. But we bracket area. It's a great, wonderful life to be a college teacher or professor. It's a wonderful life. You get to study things that matter to you. You get the excitement of being in a classroom with young people, often or non-traditional students too. And that is meaningful work.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy to take that for granted. What are the disadvantages? The disadvantages are, in some areas, and again, it depends a great deal on the area, the job market is exceptionally challenging. You have to really want to do this. Because let's imagine you follow the traditional path and you get a PhD. Getting a PhD is hard and long. And sometimes too long, which I've written about. And but even when it's not, it still takes a while. And the outcomes are more uncertain than we would like because of the job in some areas. Some areas, if you're getting a PhD in computer science, you have a lot of different opportunities. But in some areas, particularly the humanities, you have to be willing to do it knowing that the outcome is uncertain. The other, I think, disadvantage is you don't really have as much control as you would in other learned professions, I'd say that, over where you live. You're going to take a job and you're going to move for that job typically. And that can be an inhibition for people with family commitments or other things. So the advantages are the life, where you have a lot of control over your own time. You can pursue projects that you're passionate about. You get to work and teach young people, work with and teach young people and hopefully shape and inspire them if you can do that well. That's really important work. And I think colleges and universities are fundamentally important institutions in our democracy, not just in our society.
Yeah.
Downsides are the uncertainty of the job market, given the time commitment, and the, you need to be pretty flexible about where you want to live.
Yep. And I would say that flexibility, that particular component has come closer to the surface for a number of young people as their sensibilities about those things have changed too over time.
People ask me about going to graduate school. I'll say, I think it's a wonderful, noble vocation. And there are many great things about it. You should, if it's what you feel you need to do, you should do it. I have more specific advice for young people. Like I would always say, don't borrow to go to graduate school. Make sure you get into a program that pays your expenses. et cetera, et cetera. But there's other kind of pieces of advice I give. I'm always interested in giving people advice about this. But those are the fundamental dynamics.
Turning now more formally to your area of expertise as an American religious historian. In 2012, you published American Religion in the American Historical Association's, American History Now series. After offering an overview of titles published since the mid to late 1990s, you close by contending that what these titles, and I quote here, demonstrate is the promise of contemporary religious history, more fully realized in this scholarly generation than any other, and its increasingly successful efforts. If you were to write a comparable work today, in what ways might your argument there become the same?
Mhm.
In what ways might it be different?
Yeah, 2012, I can't believe that was 11 years ago. But, uh, when I wrote that, what was stunning was just the number of really good books coming out on religious history. Uh, I was writing really about the United States, but it was starting to become true a little bit more in a global sense too. And that you wouldn't have predicted. Like when I went to graduate school from 86 to 92, it's not that no one was writing on religious history, but it was a much smaller field, something. And that changed. It changed in one generation. And there were some great scholars who wrote important books that inspired people. I think there was a sense that religion remained important in American politics. I mean, we could talk about cultural history and the way it shaped religious history. I think almost all of that is still true. And so the volume and quality of work on religious history has continued at a pretty high level. It might diminish somewhat over time. I think there's more interest now, for example, in economic history than there was a generation ago, but it's still at a pretty high level. So I might, if I were writing that essay again, I might be a little bit more cautious. I'm not sure, but the AHA did a survey of historians and what they identified as their subfields, and I can't remember if I referenced in the essay. Religion came out as number 1 or number 2. That's unbelievable. You wouldn't have predicted that, 40 years ago. And so, these things can sometimes move in cycles, and this turned out to be a really good cycle to be studying religion.
Yeah. Thank you. You're the author of numerous articles as well as 4 books, the most recently being published by Norton just last year, Catholicism, A Global History from the French Revolution to Pope Francis. Of all the writing you've done, which project to date yielded the greatest sense of vocational satisfaction for you?
We love our projects in the way that we love our children, equally. And I have to say, in terms of reception, this last book, it's called Catholicism, Global History from the French Revolution to Pope Francis. That's probably been the most rewarding. I always, what I say in the book, and I'll say to you now, is I wrote for 2 reasons. One was there was all this amazing work on the history of modern Catholicism in various parts of the world, but I didn't feel, at least, anybody had put it together in a coherent 1-volume way. And I tried to do that in the book, and it's gotten a pretty nice reception. And then second, personally, there's so much, Pope Francis always says we are not in an era of change, but a change of era. I love that. Not an era of change, but a change of era. It seems like it's a fundamental shift, not just within Catholicism and what's it going to be in the 21st century, but in our political system, in our environmental, ecological system. We are in an era, as historians often say, of speeded up. If you were living through the 1940s, you thought history was really speeding up. If you were living in the late 18th century in Europe, you thought history was really speeding up. So much was happening. We are in an era like that now. And so the second reason I wrote the book is, can we have a good, savvy baseline to get us to where we need to be to understand this era that we're living?
Yeah. As someone who's written for both academic journals and more popular periodicals, university presses, and trade publishers, what process do you follow when you try to discern how to connect the message, the medium, and the audience?
Well, I don't have a formula. I will say I have made a conscious effort in a couple of books to go with the trade press, which is north and really try and be deliberate about reaching the largest audience possible. And I have to say, an editor at Norton, a woman named Elaine Mason, who's fantastic, and who was pretty ruthless about, well, I'll say one of her big pieces of advice: why don't historians use their biggest asset, which is chronology? Tell things in the order they occurred. Try and keep the book at a manageable length. Keep chapters at 10,000 words. A whole range of things to try and make serious history accessible and readable. I'm very passionate about that, actually. And the historians I've admired in my career, including my advisor, David Kennedy, were unbelievably good at are unbelievably good at that. And so that is the kind of historian I always wanted to be. And so I tried to do a little bit of writing for general audiences too. It doesn't mean I publish books with scholarly presses too, but even there, with a general audience sensibility, I think it's a huge advantage for historians as a profession and discipline that we still can reach larger audiences in a way that more technical areas do not. And we shouldn't lose that. So,
In what ways then, if any, should promotion and tenure processes also recognize work that reaches wider academic
yeah,
or audience members instead of just the guild?
that's an interesting question. We actually debate that a lot.
Yeah.
You want to demonstrate that you can do the highest level of the guild. It's not so much that you can't reach other people, but you want to work at the highest level, in the tenure promotion process. But I think we probably are moving to an era where more types of scholarship are recognized as valuable.
Yeah.
And so what do we do about somebody who hosts a podcast? That's probably an important contribution to scholarship if it's done well. It doesn't replace some of the core original scholarship, but that's a wonderful form of public outreach. And I think all of us are trying to think a little bit about what that might mean.
Yeah, thank you. Turning our attention now more formally to the University of Notre Dame. As a tribute to Notre Dame alumni who lost their lives in World War I, the words God, Country, Notre Dame were etched over the east door to the Basilica of the Sacred Heart. And today, those words are often echoed, dare I say, as a concise iteration of the university's mission. In what way do those words etch themselves into the character of the students who study at Notre Dame and the employees who come there to serve?
The students and employees, of course, are different population. But I'd like to think that almost everyone at Notre Dame recognizes that the university has a distinctive name. And God, Country, Notre Dame is one way to put it. Another way to put it is we want to be the best global Catholic research university, on par with, but distinct from, the world's best private university. And I think both are true. Just a small example about the country part of God, Country, Notre Dame that might sound like kind of jingoistic patriotism, and maybe a little bit after World War I that was there. That's when it was etched into the wall of the Basilica. On the other hand, I've always been proud that Notre Dame has sustained a commitment to its ROTC programs over a very long period of time, when some other universities moved away from that and then moved back to it. And there was always a sense that not an uncritical loyalty, but a loyalty to service to the nation, and a loyalty to service to the church, and a loyalty to service to the university. I see that around me every day. Those are important dimensions of their experience.
Just last night, ironically, my daughter forwarded me a picture that was sent to her by one of her professors, who's a Notre Dame graduate, of Father Hesburgh and President Eisenhower standing in the driveway of the Morris Inn reviewing the ROTC contingent.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But yeah, and I understand too that the football game that's scheduled with Navy has, longstanding roots to this sort of commitment too, and the ways that those institutions have mutually served one another over time. Yeah.
Well, and there's some reality to the oral history that Navy helped save Notre Dame during World War II by sponsoring a significant number of programs at the university when the university was struggling to get students.
Yep. Notre Dame is defined by a commitment to the church, to academics, and to athletics. In what ways, if any, do those commitments work together? And then in what ways can they, work against each other too.
Well, we've talked a little bit about church and academics.
Yeah.
Athletics is interesting, right? I mean, this is a university with big time athletics, and at its best, and Notre Dame is often doing it at its best. It really, I so admire our Division I student athletes. They have extraordinary commitments and schedules. They take the same classes that all the other students take. They live in the same dorms, and yet they have this other commitment where they're trying to compete at the very highest level athletically. Some of our best students, some of our most ambitious future leaders are Division I athletes. So that's a wonderful thing. That goal of a strong student-centered experience, as well as competing at the very highest level, that's not controversial within Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Outside Notre Dame, that has become much more challenging because of the world of Division I athletics. It's an industry that, I don't know if broken is the right word, but it's in great flux. Yeah. And you could name them as well as like the transfer portal, name, image, licensing agreements, conference realignment. All of those things don't seem fundamentally driven by protecting the student athlete experience. And Notre Dame is one of the institutions, and we're not alone, really trying to protect that. And I've admired the leadership of Father Jenkins, our president, and Jack Swarbrick, who's the athletic director, on those issues. And let's hope that we get to a more stable place within college athletics that protects what's good about it, but also keeps students at the center of the student athlete experience.
Yeah. A little more particular question then about the religious character of Notre Dame. In what way is it the product of the charisms of the religious order that founded the university, the Congregation of Holy Cross?
Well, a lot. Holy Cross was founded in the early 19th century, and from the beginning saw itself as an educational order, and with a particular focus on, as they say, educating the mind and the spirit, heart. And so that meant a big focus on residential life, which has always been true at Notre Dame. The Holy Cross priests who are on campus are very committed to that. Most of them live in the residence halls. People can't believe that, but that's true. Father Malloy, who's the past president, the president emeritus, has lived in the same residence hall for 50 years.
Yep.
Father Jenkins, our current president, lives in graduate student housing. And so that is a deep commitment of the order that is high level education, but also commitment to community and residential life. So in that sense, from the very beginning, Holy Cross helped shape Notre Dame's ethos. More broadly, it's, the diversity and everything else, but the Holy Cross presence is very significant. Continues.
In a recent conversation with Monk Malloy, he'd mentioned the wholesale renovation that Soren, one of the older buildings on campus, had undergone. And one of the gifts he received, and I believe he didn't know it was going to happen with the initial plans for the renovation, was he got additional soundproofing in his room.
But good for him.
Yeah.
He's earned, I think, after 50 years.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah. He's very very committed to the students in Soren, but he said, I never thought what a difference that would make in terms of
that's really good.
Yeah.
Didn't know that. But if you were to look out the window I'm looking out right now, you were about 30 yards from Soren. So that's worth the room.
Yeah. Earlier this fall, the university released Notre Dame 2033, a strategic framework. And for viewers who haven't seen it yet, I would encourage them to read it. It's available for download on the university's website. The result of over 2 years of work, the decision was made to develop a strategic framework and not a strategic plan in an effort to convey both flexibility and a commitment to revisit and adapt the document at regular intervals. What do you and your colleagues hope will be accomplished by perhaps, say, the end of that first interval in relation to the investment in faculty?
So I mentioned, there'll be some university level initiatives coming out of that.
Yep.
And I could talk about the details of those and democracy, ethics, and poverty. And ultimately, we hope in environment sustainability and health and well-being and a couple other areas. Maybe more important, just to say, it was a pretty interesting process. That was most of my year last year, is trying to develop that document, and with many, many other. but it was sort of, I was the person waking up every day thinking about how can we get to this?
Yeah.
A lot of consultation, a lot of faculty committees, faculty-led and staff committees. And I was really pleased by the energy, the sense that Notre Dame's called to do more, given the resources that have been given, and the kind of, I could almost say unity, if I can say that at a university, around the big picture mission, which is to be every bit as good as the Harvard, Yale, Stanfords of the world. Those are culture shaping institutions, and there's a lot to admire about those institutions. But the world doesn't need another Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Northwestern, Chicago. The world needs the best, most distinctive, most authentic Notre Dame. And that's really what the framework is trying to get us toward.
Yeah.
How do we do financial aid for PhD, professional, undergraduate students? How do we do these programs I mentioned, but there are others across the whole university, and enable us to shape the world through our scholarship and shape the world through the students we train? How do we build a more diverse and inclusive community and see that as actually part of our Catholic mission? So those are the things that we talk about in the framework. It was kind of an inspiring process for me. We had a kickoff event, and I mean, maybe the provost is sort of paid to say that, but we had a kickoff event where we brought in the former provost of Duke, Peter Long, and then Barbara Snyder, who's the current president current president of the AU, was formerly president of Case Western. It was pretty great. We had a huge turnout and a lot of good, lively discussion about what are the opportunities and pitfalls that might face Notre Dame in the next 10 years.
In terms of the investments, one of the points, and you echoed it just a second ago, is Notre Dame's contributions to global Catholicism. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, one thing we say in the framework, which is empirically correct, is that the average Catholic in the world right now is a woman of color living in the global South. Okay, it's not someone who looks like me. And if Notre Dame is going to sustain and deepen its Catholic mission in the next generation, which again, I think is crucial, that's how we serve the country and the world. We have to grapple with that reality. It means we probably need a more global Catholic community on campus, not just sending our students, which is a very good thing to do, out into the world. It means we want to think about developing research programs around global Catholicism that will enable us to do more. So a whole range of, it's one reason, given the centrality of poverty to Catholic social thought, that we've chosen to focus on poverty as a theme in the strategic framework. So that recognition that the Catholic Church of the future is much more centered in the global South, much more people of color, that does inform the planning of an institution that has global ambitions like Notre Dame.
Yeah. The first of the four goals identified by this framework is to ensure that our Catholic character informs all of our behaviors. The first threat then listed in relation to those goals is religious disaffiliation, which I assume is sort of echoing the context in which we live here in the North Atlantic region of the world. In what ways are you and your colleagues investing in faculty and academic programs so that such a challenge can also be an opportunity, as the language also reads in the framework?
Yeah, you put it better than I did. I mean, like, how could that challenge be an opportunity? Various organizations on campus, the Institute for Church Life, others, are looking at the complex problem of disaffiliation, especially among young people. No one institution is going to solve that. There are larger cultural things at work, but we need to better understand it and better know how to react to it. I do think that's a threat long-term to Notre Dame, but it's also an opportunity. It's a way for us to make a difference in the world, to better understand it. And even in this period of disaffiliation, of course, Catholic Church is still a very big institute in not just the North Atlantic, but around the world, as I've just said. So we have to kind of grapple with that reality.
To our last question then, and concluding our time, the end of the framework acknowledges, and you've echoed this a couple of times in our conversation already, building the leading global Catholic university on par with, but distinct from, the world's best private universities has never been an easy or simple task. And then it goes on to read, it never will be. What kind of theological imagination needs to be cultivated then to envision such a university?
That's such a good question, really. But not many people would ask, what's the theological imagination? Well, if you look at Notre Dame's history, in a way, there's the founding with Father Sorin in the 19th century. There's almost a refound with Father Hesburgh after World War II, who saw from the beginning of his presidency, he had bigger ambitions for Notre Dame. It's going to be, then he would have said, a national place. And it's going to be a top-level research university, which if you said that in 1952, it almost seemed implausible, given Notre Dame's resources and where it was at. And yet that's come to happen. I think one shift in the next generation is becoming more global. And that's a part of building the great global Catholic research university. And that requires a theological imagination, and a sense of what is it to be at once a small community located in St. Joseph County and, Northwest Indiana, and yet an institution of global influence. What an interesting problem and prospect for us.
Yeah.
The other interesting dimension of it is, I don't think there's ever been a roadmap for what Notre Dame's trying to do. There isn't like a model out there where we say, oh, we could only be like this place, we'd have done what we need to do. There are some distinctive qualities to Notre Dame, so that if Notre Dame doesn't succeed, I think pluralism within higher education and the church and everything else is diminished. So in that sense, the stakes are high. And that, I don't think it will be easy. And I think we put our shoulders to the wheel and do the best that we can.
Yeah, Father Hesburgh used to use the phrase, a Catholic Princeton. But if it became Princeton, that would be insufficient. It would need to be an institution, comparable standards, but Catholic. And that part, demands this kind of thinking.
We don't need another Princeton. It's a great institution. But we need to be that good, and yet be Notre Dame.
Yep. Amongst members of the community there, in particular, those who are part of the educational community, curricular and co-curricular, what kind of virtues need to be cultivated to envision such a university and the reality of its emergence?
Yeah, I'd have to think about that. A lot of what I've said this morning hasn't been especially humble. But humility is a great virtue, and a sense of recognition of challenges, flaws, commitment over the long haul. One thing that's been very true of the Congregation of Holy Cross, we've had 3 presidents since 1952.
Yeah,
that's an unbelievable thing, an unbelievable level of commitment to the institution. And I think that has served the university well. There are risks to that. There's risks, of you become embedded in certain ways, but there's also very good consistency there. So that's a virtue, consistency. Humility, consistency, obviously moral integrity. Those are the things that come to mind.
Yeah. Wonderful. Our guest has been Dr. John T. McGreevy, the Charles and Jill Fischer Provost, and the Francis A. McAnaney Professor of History at the University of Notre Dame. Thank you for taking the time to share your insights and wisdom with us today.
It's been a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Saturdays at 7. Christian Scholars Review's conversation series with thought leaders about the academic vocation and the relationship that vocation shares with the church. We invite you to join us again next week for Saturdays at 7.